that's that. Yeah, I find that usually people will bring up the sort of studies, the blue zone studies. They'll bring up sort of certain epidemiological observational studies that have been done. And when you actually look at the data and look at the time and sometimes you can actually access the time they went, and immediately you know, okay, that was that season. They missed all this other stuff. And then, because as you said, the majority of times it's a very limited period of time. And it's how I became aware of it. Initially, I sort of had a blind belief that, this is, they've done extensive studies and understood. But when I started seeing all the studies being done on Greece, I realized, okay, I knew my culture, I knew the environment, I knew the seasonality, and I'm going, okay, they actually came in the summer, in these seasons, in this particular time, when there's either a lot of fasting or there's a lot of, plants around and all that. And I go, okay, they've completely missed everything then. And then the other thing about meat, we don't view meat the same way. What most people call meat, we only call beef.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, and that's where I think the Icaria study really missed the mark, especially the big one that everyone cites from 2009, is that they gave this little survey out with just a handful of foods on it and asked people to tally those foods for 6 months. Well, they put red meat on there, but red meat in Greece is beef, and it's only beef. That's not lamb, even though to the rest of the world we would consider lamb red meat. It's not goat, which the rest of the world would consider red meat, but to a Greek it is not. It is a totally different food. And so they had this section for red meat, and really the Icarians don't eat a lot of beef because beef aren't good on that island. It's not a roaming island. There's no grasses growing for the beef to eat. So you'll import some beef. There's a little bit, but I thought honestly on the surveys they were generous by saying they have it 1 to 2 times a week, because what they really eat each day is goat every single day, pretty much.
That I actually found surprising as well, because I know from even the regions that my father comes from, the west coast, the mountainous areas, it's pretty much goat and sheep. There is no beef.
Exactly.
So, for somebody to get beef, especially back in those days, we're talking about before roads existed, extensive roads, you would actually have to bring it from the lowlands up on a donkey. It's not going to happen. So you had very few things that got to these. This is another reason why even in the mountainous regions in Greece, until road networks were built through the mountains, pretty much there wasn't much grain either, in these areas. Because
I would say, you still see that so much in Icaria. If you can go to these little grocery stores that are really for the Greek tourists coming to visit family, because the Greeks there who live there really provide for themselves fully. So they're not going to the supermarket at all. But even there's not really imported foods. You're not going to get things from mainland Greece too much. It's mostly local things and that kind of thing. So they still don't do a lot of importing on that island. It's definitely the least imported region I've been to so far. So yeah, it's very much just like local and what you can get there, and beef isn't one of those. So here are these people eating goat and lamb every day, definitely goat every day, but lamb frequently. Tons of pork. I can't even tell you, every restaurant I had, my appetizer was pork liver, and it was wonderful. And then, you had lots of...
Most people don't believe me, the amount, how much pork we consume. My father would rather eat pork than any other meat all day long.
Yes.
A bit like the Okinawans,
A lot of the old men and the grandpas, they're eating pork belly for lunch every day, like just cold cuts of pork belly.
That's right.
Yeah, they love it, and it's their daily noontime or 1 o'clock before their nap lunch. So pork is a real staple there, and these things weren't on the questionnaire. There wasn't a section for pork, there wasn't a section for lamb or goat, and there also wasn't a section for dairy, which I honestly don't even know how they missed, because
for dairy,
every household they didn't have dairy on the survey.
I mean, they usually have those. I mean, when they do epidemiological studies like in the US or Australia or whatever, they include dairy in there. You find dairy,
Yes.
and they usually will put low fat or high or full fat, type dairy in a section, so people who are vegetarian or whatever can tick off whatever box. But that's how they. And that is extremely.
Isn't
Really,
it?
in the actual, this is in the 2009. Was that in specifically the 2009 study or in
From
past
everyone I
studies?
saw. Yeah, and I can send you all of that because some of them are in Greek, so you'll be able to read those. But
Okay, yeah, I can.
but yeah, I'll forward you those because I was able to, while I was there, I was able to meet a pharmacist who worked alongside the researchers a little bit. He helped to get local people involved in that kind of thing, and he owns one of the main wineries there. But you can see I did a video. It's dry because it's just going over the studies. But if anybody wants to look at the studies, I did do that and show you like where it has the questionnaire and that kind of thing, and what foods they have on it and what foods they don't. But yeah, they miss dairy, which is odd because every household I went into was making their own cheese. And every restaurant I went into, several of the restaurants would let me into the kitchen, which was very kind of them. And they were making their own cheese as well. So, and that's your appetizer. In fact, most of the appetizer sections on menus was just tons of different kinds of cheese that you could have fried, right?
That's right.
So
yeah.
yes, yeah. So cheese is such a staple, and that wasn't on there. I found that interesting because even despite missing all of those staples in their diet, they still, with their questionnaire, found that the Greek diet was at least 60% fat, which isn't surprising probably for you because everything is just drowning in fat, right? It's very
Pretty
fatty.
much.
Yeah, like the greens are in a mode of fats and all these kinds of things. So it's very different than the Mediterranean cookbooks that you get, at least stateside, where it's like 1 teaspoon of olive oil for the whole
Oh
family.
God. You should see my father's cooking. It sort of drowns. It's like it's,
Yes.
did you put the whole
And you
bottle in,
buy,
Dad?
yeah,
It's
no,
just,
honestly, and you buy these huge bottles of olive oil here, and you go through them quickly.
yeah,
Yeah.
look, a lot of people don't realize Greeks love fat,
Yes.
animal fats, olive oil. I mean, olive oil in the mountainous regions and stuff like that isn't as
No.
pronounced, and it's and you won't find it in areas like I suspect in the more rural areas in Icaria, it's probably very, very limited oils in general. But it's more butter fat and stuff like that. Because I know from Dad's village, my auntie, she used to cook with, because she had a whole lot of, I actually even herded some goats, and pretty much it was all the goat butter, the goat fat and the butter fat, and she would basically use that for a lot of her cooking and stuff like that. So it was
That's right.
most of the actual, I mean, we do, sheep are around, and sheep are used primarily. I find sheep milk is used for yogurt to a large extent in Greece, where when it comes to goat milk, it's either consumed, some is made into cheese, and other parts are used like in the cooking to be combined and all that. Because Dad still does a lot of, like, even a lot of some of his cooking. If he can get access to goat milk, he'll use it. He used to in Greece when we were over there for that period, because you had access. I mean, the mountain, the villages weren't too far away, and so in the local city, it was only about 70,000 population. There you could actually access goat dairy quite a bit, and raw goat dairy, and I used to consume quite a bit. I have to say, I do enjoy goat milk more than cow's milk.
Yeah.
So,
No, I understand.
yeah.
Yeah, because I'm in love with the sheep. I love although I will say, well, I love goat dairy as well. But the goat butter that I've had in the mountains, you're absolutely right. I want to emphasize what you said and just reinforce it for your listeners, because it's really true. We think a lot of us out from outside of Greece and the Mediterranean think that they eat mostly olive oil as their fats, but really it's not. It's really more the animal fats that they consume, and the olive oil is more to put on top of things. So like when you serve the horta, it's served with a ton of olive oil, but really a lot of the cooking is done with the animal fats and
Or
that
over
kind of thing.
over feta cheese as well.
Yes.
Like
Yeah,
salads,
absolutely.
feta cheese,
Uh-huh.
stuff like that. You put a whole lot. You douse it with olive oil. It's used in salads. It's used in, and
Mhm.
it's a seasonal type thing as well.
Right.
It's not all year round. It varies. I mean, in the cities, it has changed, because I noticed when I was actually in Athens, more of the population there tend to use more oils than animal fats, because to some extent they've been influenced by this sort of low fat type message, especially the middle class, less the working class, and it's more the upper middle class and some of the middle class that are basically, sometimes a bit of too much education can be a bad thing in some circumstances.
Especially in this field. Yes. And that has definitely happened. There was a lot of marketing to the grandmas about the margarine being better. And so you still see sometimes the grandmas buying that in the cities. You don't see that outside of the cities, at least I haven't. But yeah, they're especially middle upper class and middle class are definitely doing that. Although it's starting to fade out. They're starting to learn, and honestly, they just break the rules anyway. So I was hanging out with a grandma 2 days ago. We went for a swim in the ocean, and then she had me over for some fish stew, and she had this cream in her fridge, and she, like so many people, thought that this was not good for her, but she loves it. She loves it. So she buys it for her coffee and then drinks 2 bottles. So
it's probably the best thing she does.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. So they have been kind of like told, don't do this, but they're naughty. So they're still doing it, which is really good, because I think that's actually saving them. But yeah, when I go to the mountain regions, it's some of the best butter I've ever had. One of these butters I had, I would have just eaten plain, just by itself. It was so good. And I don't know if that was sheep or goat, but it definitely wasn't cow. It was very like mild, but I couldn't explain it, but beautiful.
I suspect it was goat. I suspect it was goat.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But it's nice. There's this store here that I love to go to called Stamos.
Yeah.
And it has
I just mentioned one thing before you go into that store. When you take like the cream or the butter type from a sheep, for instance, it still has that a mild type of sheepy type, where with goat, it isn't the case. It loses it. I suspect it was goat. Yeah.
I bet you're right. I bet you're absolutely right. But yeah, there are these stores here that just have sheep dairy, just so you can get your cream, you can get your butter, you can get all that kind of stuff. They even have ice cream made out of it with stevia, by the way. Stevia is the thing here, which is really nice. Okay. They love it. Yeah, most ice cream shops will have an ice cream made with stevia. So anyway, yeah, the dairy.
I'm in the wrong country.
I know. I know. Stevia has really caught on here. They have whole bakeries that cater with stevia baked goods. I've been shocked at how great that is. And the ketogenic diet here is a thing as well that's kind of taken on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's quite interesting. I mean, I'm not surprised, because Greece has always been a high fat sort of food style where plants are secondary, animal fats, animal foods are primary. Whether it's dairy, whether it's meats, is always the primary element. I mean, and when it comes to fish and stuff like that, it's primarily coastal. It's small, coastal, nothing from deep waters, and it's probably because it's seasonal as well. It's you end up getting a better balance, and I think land animals are the main thing, and it's goats or sheep. I mean, there's probably only, just for the listeners, there are 3 places in Greece that have beef. One is Crete, you'll find in some parts of Crete. The other is Evia, which is an island to the northeast of Athens. And then in northern Greece, in the Greek Macedonia and Thrace, in some parts of there, you will find, because there are sort of sort of plateau type areas where you can actually have large herds of cattle in those sort of areas, and that's the sort of stuff you get. But once you hit the northern part of the border, then it becomes quite mountainous again, especially to the west and to the north of Thessalonica. It becomes then very mountainous, and then then again it reverts back to goats, sheep, this sort of type of animal that's primarily there. I just wanted to cover that because there is a bit of beef there, and so
yes.
that's where the majority of beef comes from.
And you see a lot of that imported into Athens. So Athens has a lot of beef. You see a lot more of it. But you can kind of get any of the meats here for sure. But yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And on the coastal cities, the fish are really delectable. The Greeks are really good at doing the whole fish, and especially those little fish. I just love. You can just pop them in your mouth and eat them. They're delicious. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I love that as well. You know, my where that comes from, it comes from a mountainous area between Etolokatania and Evritania, you know, the two provinces there on the west coast. So there's a bridge there that actually connects the two provinces, and Dad's got a bit of land just about, what would it be, 25 meters from the bridge, or on the Etolokatania side of the border, and it just goes from the main sort of road, arterial road that connects the two provinces. You go just from the road straight into the lake, and it's a beautiful lake. I don't know whether you've been up through there at all.
I have, yeah.
Oh, you have?
I've been to a couple places. Yeah, I'd have to look at a map to tell you exactly where, but yes.
Okay, so you've actually probably seen the lake, and it's got this sort of, it's like a surreal type. The watercolor, the blue, is a bit like a surreal color. I don't know whether you remember that. And
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, the water is so unique all over Greece. Like, yeah, no, I think it's hard to forget that from the lake, because it's really, and you almost have to go to see it, to see what it's like. And I would say that for other spots too. Have you been to Mount Olympus and the waterfalls there?
I have been up through there. Yes.
I went rappelling down the waterfalls. It's a whole day. You hike all the way up and then you rappel down hundreds of waterfalls.
Did
And
you see any of the gods there?
I felt them in my heart because it was so beautiful. The watercolors in each little pool as you came down each waterfall were completely different and just all uniquely beautiful to themselves. And I find that throughout Greece, the water.
You do find that sort of same stuff on the west coast as well.
Yes.
Because those sort of islands aren't the outcrops of volcanoes. It's actually the land that's actually broken off the mainland, and they are full of vegetation. They look like the mainland, but they're just small islands like Zakynthos and stuff like that. But they are mountainous sort of. But they've also got low areas, and they've got waterfalls and, you know, stuff like that. And you go, this looks like on the mainland, but it's an island. You know, it's sort of really, but you know.
Oh, that's incredible.
There are really nice picturesque places. That's true. Yes.
Yeah, it's something I love about living in Greece, because in the matter of a couple hours, you can be up in the mountains skiing, or you can be at a waterfall swimming in the base, or you can be in the Mediterranean, or you can be on an island. You can go up to some real serious, almost Alp-like mountains up in the north. There's so many different options. There's one place up north I haven't been to yet that has a hot waterfall. It's like a heated waterfall from underneath. It sounds really interesting. So as soon as they open up the doors,
where is it exactly?
I can tell you, but I need to look at the name.
Okay.
I'll pull that up.
I don't think I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the top of my bucket list. I keep a little bucket list. The language is so different. Let's see. Pozar, Pozar.
Okay. No, I haven't heard of the place. No.
So I really want to go there. It's thermal baths and the hot waterfall, which just sounds incredible.
Sounds really nice.
Yes.
An interesting location. I'll have to include that on next time I'm in that direction.
It is. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I love leading retreats here, because there's all these really interesting little pockets. Like, I've been loving going up to the Delphi region. There's this beautiful mountain there with all these they're known for having over 300 different kinds of mushrooms on that mountain, and they're just enchanting mushrooms. You feel like you're in a fairy tale village. It really feels real, which is
I know
amazing.
the area. I've been through there because we used to go with like school holidays and stuff like that to Delphi and the
Aracopa?
the
Okay.
surrounding areas and all that sort of stuff. So I've been through it, and I did actually drag a friend of mine through the
Uh-huh.
entire Peloponnese when we were
Oh,
over
that's
there
great.
all over the Peloponnese, and then eventually through central Greece, like Stetia Latha, right through, and we went across the Rio Andirion up to Agrinion, where I come from. And then from there, I actually
Mhm.
initially got lost, and I said, look, Andrew, we'll have to go all the way back, go from the main entrance, because this whole area is new. It's, it used to be a rural part, a semi-rural part, and then you used to come through this village which was close to the actual city, and you could actually access it. And I was sort of going, okay, because I know it's the quickest way to get to my uncle's place. So I said, we'll go through there. And then I go, oh, God, I'm lost. So we had to backtrack and then go through the other way. And so eventually, yeah. But it was a bit of a strange experience in that way. But
I bet.
once I was back into that centre part, it was all,
Mhm.
look, I had a ball of a time. I met up with a childhood friend of mine, and we just went all over the place and did a whole lot of things with his family as well. So yes, I was really entertained and really enjoyed myself. So I mean,
Good.
I look forward to coming back at some stage. I'm sort of too many commitments here in this part of the world at the moment, but at some point I will be drifting back to Greece
Good.
because I do miss the place quite a bit. And even though this is something that people don't understand, Dad's got a piece of property. Even if he was to pass away and leave it, which he says he'll leave it to me anyway, but we'll see. Um, the ultimate thing is I would never sell it. That's the thing
Yes.
with Greeks, that
Yes.
sort of ancestral land you do not get rid of, so
That's so
it's
true.
and
And
it's
it's
not the
so different
value.
than the rest of the world. You just don't. And also, they have different property laws here. So you'll see a lot of like empty, say, apartments, flats, or houses, and they've been empty for a really long time, you can tell, but the government can't do anything about it because someone has that title.
That's right.
Someone has it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in the States, if someone hadn't addressed a building in, say, 6 months, they would take ownership, something like that. So there, and you don't have that law in Greece. Once it's in your family, it's in your family, and it stays that way. And
Yeah.
people are very
And
true
there's
to that.
communal titles as well,
Yeah.
which a lot of people aren't aware of. Like um, when you cross that bridge to the before you cross the bridge to your right hand side away from the lake, up in the mountainous areas there, all that mountain area is actually on a common title of all Sopranuses. So we would all have to agree before something happened to it, and there'd be no way in hell that I would
No
agree, and many
way.
others.
Right.
And so, some of my relatives still think there is some World War II gold up there somewhere.
Mhm.
Nobody's found anything, or nobody's telling, one of the two. But these
Oh,
myths
that's great.
grow out of
Mhm.
of these sort of things, events of the past. But it's amusing.
Yes.
It sort of provides some sort of entertaining type conversations in the village.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. No, and I'm sure there are things like that. I know my family's ties to Greece are that my grandfather, he was in World War II and his plane went down outside of the coast of Greece, right by Halkida.
Okay.
And he was saved by some Greek fishermen, which was really brave of them at the time because the Nazis really owned Greece at that time. And if anyone was caught harboring an American or
You'd
an
be killed,
ally, they
and
were
your
murdered.
family.
Yeah. Exactly, and really in awful ways. And some Greek fishermen rescued him and hid him in Greece for quite some time around Halkida, and then a doctor took him on and kind of shuffled him all around for several months until he could get out. But things like that, his plane are still there. There's all sorts of stuff that's still there,
Oh, there
and
you
so
go.
many people were taken from their homes. I've heard so many stories from the older generation that are still living, because people live so long here, talking about when the Nazis came and just so many people getting marched to their death, and then all their belongings, you know, being there and that kind of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's hidden treasures and things like that.
There probably is, but again, you know, they're amusing stories. Let's put it that way. So
Yes.
entertaining for, you know, for the locals in that regard. Just a few things. We were talking about some of the actual studies, the especially the last one that was done. What was included in those studies, actually, in terms of answers? What were they asking?
Yeah, so they asked about vegetables, and they separated potatoes from the vegetables, which was interesting. They asked about beans. They asked about olive oil. They asked about, I think, well, there was the red meat and the fish. They did ask about fish. They may have asked about chicken. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back to it to see if they asked about chicken or not. But chicken isn't as often eaten as the other things in the traditional regions, in the tourist regions. It's common.
That's right. It's in the tourism. That's right. In tourist locations, you find it. But traditionally, Greeks are more, you could say, land animals. That's yeah, exactly. It's basically those sort of animals. Whether it's, you know, it's pork, goat, lamb. And the other, you know, fish, beef, and chicken is really the occasionally if you can get access to it, and it depends. We have to be. There is the regionality as well. The regions that I mentioned, the 4 regions that I mentioned earlier, in those areas, there is more beef consumption compared to other meats, and that's an important proviso. But the sort of importance that I actually wanted to remind people is when you look at a blue zone, you know, because we tend to sort of have a very negative view of pork in particular. And when you look
even in the carnivore community, because of the fatty acid profile.
Exactly. I just ignore that. I just think that's nonsense. Because when you look at I think the way fats are in animals, in the sort of the bilayers, in that sort of structure, they're far more stable, you know. And when I look at studies, looking at different types of animal foods, even when you cook and you put, and I've actually shown some of my subs, I've actually shown them where, in terms of aldehydes, because in order to get aldehydes, you know, the more oxidative byproducts exist in fats, the higher the aldehydes go. It's a well-known thing. Aldehydes increase with more oxidation in the actual fats themselves. That's why we see massive amounts of aldehydes in the seed oils and stuff like that, in the sort of omega-3 fish supplements and those sort of things. We view the algal supplements and some of the others as well. But you don't see it when you cook pork. It's slightly lower, just a tiny bit. Statistically, it's not significant, I have to be honest. But I do like to make the point that it's still, even though it's not significantly, it's still slightly lower in terms of aldehydes compared to tallow and butter, which basically tells you one thing, that pork fat is even more stable than the others that we consider the most stable. So we need to just jettison that whole nonsense, because when we look at longevity populations like the Sardinians in the mountains do not use olive oil. They only cook with lard, you know.
That's right.
And
they eat a lot of organ meats.
Exactly. Well. Yeah. And the Okinawans are very much the same, that, you know, they sort of have a tradition of, we start the day with pork, we finish the day with pork. You know, when you've got such a massive pork consumption, and I don't find it strange. You know, I look at the ancestral, I look at the chimps, they hunted small piglets. And humans, as they evolved, I don't think we had the capacity to really take on big animals initially until we became large-sized humans. But as that evolutionary movement forward would have meant we would have gone for small stuff. It's like the sort of chimps of the West Africa, which I've sort of done some work on, you've probably seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that what they're hunting is small type prey, things that are easy, or small piglets or stuff like that, which they can get access to. And so when something like that evolutionary wise has been in the diet for a very long time, for millions of years potentially, I believe that is, in particular, what it tells you is that there would be built-in adaptation. I mean, if you can't adapt after so many years, you're never going to adapt to anything. It's just, it becomes a nonsensical argument in a sense. And I've tried to push that. But at the same time, even though you say that to people, they're always going to say, well, are you certain, Harry, that they consumed so many, these ancient populations consumed so much wild pork or boar or whatever? It's always a hard thing, because when you're looking back in time, you've got the N15 data, but the N15 data doesn't tell you what source of animal food it's coming from.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
You can't argue that point. So all you can look is closest ancestors and say, well, look what they're doing. Or look at some tribal populations in Africa that are still living a more tribal type lifestyle and hunting. And you can say, well, they are actually, picking off some of these things seasonally, yes, but they're still picking off quite a bit of these smaller type wild boar in particular, because it's a very fatty source of food compared to other lean animals around. So it's something. I mean, the Aborigines traditionally, they would, let's say, find kangaroos that didn't have enough fat, they'd discard them.
Yes.
So
it's not worth it.
It's exactly, yes. It's well known. I mean, I know the older Aborigine ladies consumed in particular for them, the delicacy was the tail, because that's the most fattiest part of a kangaroo.
Yes. Yeah, and I would say that pattern fits here in Greece still, because when you see a meat shop, and there's usually a meat shop on each corner or so, a butcher shop, right? They advertise the baby animals here because that's what everyone wants. It's the most delectable meat. Whereas if you saw a baby lamb on a poster in the States, it would get spray painted. The vegans would go up in arms, right?
Exactly.
The kids would cry. It would be all the things. But here it's just a normal part of the culture that's maintained through the modernization of Greece. They've maintained that desire for the young animals because they're more succulent, right? They taste better, and so of
That's
course,
right.
they would never think of not advertising that kind
and they
of
tend
thing.
to have more fat as well.
Yeah.
The younger ones, well, the older animal also has more fat. The ones in between don't have, slightly leaner. So they go for either the older, which is what we call mutton in a sense, and then, or the younger, which in Greek is called galactos, which is like, it's similar to the word of milky.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's, trust Greeks to call a young animal as milky as milk. But it's sort of the tender. It's the tenderness and the softness and the rich fatness, because the more fattier meat is, it is far more tender, and so
it is.
And Greeks prize fatty cuts of meat because they are tender.
They taste just better, and they're better for you. They've got all those vitamins and minerals that you really need, especially for fertility, for immune system, for nervous system health, all of that.
I don't think the Greeks do it for that reason.
No,
they just do it for the taste.
Like you with that. Yeah. But I'll tell you what they do. When someone wants to get pregnant here, they really push the fatty cuts. So they do. That's really, true. I don't know if, so they may not, of course, they're not dissecting it into DHA or minerals. Maybe it's not the DHA, right?
But I know even in villages, the tradition of organ meats and fattier cuts of meat for the pregnant woman, because she needs more for the baby. That's their thinking. In terms of it needs more nutrition. I mean, she needs to fatten up for the baby and stuff like that. They have that sort of view, and obviously it does make sense because, the moment, anything coming in via a chylomicron will go to the adipose tissue, so it will actually provide additional stored nutrients there for later use, and that's a really important thing. But it would have been trial and error, but it's very much I see it in whenever I look at a traditional society, I see the same patterns over and over again. And it doesn't surprise me. It's just in Australasia, North America, in Northern Europe and Western Europe, you don't get that because we're so disconnected from our old traditions that we've lost that. Now, I'll give you a bit of an insight on that as well, to show you how common these traditions were throughout the whole of Europe, but they've been lost. A lot of the plants, these wild plants, like wild horta and all that sort of stuff, when the Greeks got to Australia, they actually found them here, growing wild. Where do you think they came from? It was basically people from the British Isles brought them here.
Amazing.
But the reality is none of them know about it anymore. The modern people who have got an Anglo-Celtic type background, they have no idea because they're so disconnected from that early part of their culture, the food culture. It's been just destroyed completely, gutted. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. But the early, the people that came out from the British Isles to Australia, they actually brought some of these foods with them, plant foods with them.
I'm not surprised because everyone I know, I've met so many people that were refugees during one of the wars that happened back in the day, and they would often bring things with themselves to those camps and then back as well. So there's been a big influence. I feel like the Greeks are very good about bringing that kind of thing with them. So even like I know a lot of people who were in Georgia and Kazakhstan during the wars and in camps and things there, and they brought back several of the things from there as well, but they carried somehow maybe the seeds and things like that with them when they went.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, you hear all sorts of some people grew them and just hid the stuff away. There's all sorts of there's strange stories like that, but it just shows that until you get to a sort of a modern urban society, and Australia is very urbanized. A lot of people don't realize most people that are involved in agriculture, about 3%, 97% are pretty much city slickers, or in towns, large towns, or one of the two. And a lot of unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge and tradition has just been lost in the population to their detriment. You can see it with the sort of health statistics when we look around these countries, they're pretty bad in that regard. And it's only in parts of Northern Europe and Central Europe and places, the only reason is because they've held on to a number of their traditions. You look at even Germany, East Germany and West Germany. East Germany had less sort of commercialization or loss of their old culture. The West Germans actually, even their skin looks different because they consume more pork than beef. So they look different. Because when I was in Germany in 2006, it was one thing that I noticed that the so-called, what they call them, Aussies, which is not Aussies, the Australian Aussies. It gets confusing because I actually said, to a German lady there, I actually said, she asked, where are you from? I said, I'm an Aussie. I didn't think of saying I'm an Australian. And she looked at me baffled and goes, speaking the Deutsch, do you speak German? I go, oh, what does she think I said? Maybe I didn't say it correctly. So I'm from Australia. She goes, oh, and then she explained, what I'd said. And I go, oh, really? Okay. Interesting.
No, it's true. You really do physically change based on what you're eating as well. You see it. You really see it in someone who goes carnivore or goes on the GAPS diet or some of these more intensive diets. You can often see a change within 30 days or so of how someone looks. It's really incredible how much someone can change their appearance with the change of a diet and losing inflammation and those kind of things. But I'm not surprised.
That's what I've noticed as well. My skin, how it's changed, that I got rid of all my pimples and stuff like that, and I can really like break out on my skin, on my face and different parts. I can really break out with pimples in that regard. And so I've had rough experience, and even my nephews, God, the amount of acne those two boys, had was just incredible, you know, and all again because of my older sister being for a very long time in a low fat diet and encouraging her, again, middle class, you know, they hook, line and sinker, you know, the mantras and all that sort of stuff. Where my younger sister was on an island, she basically sort of just, she didn't really get involved too much with that sort of side of things. But I mean, she did for a long period of time. She did a vegetarian type diet, so for a very long. And she had 25 years of asthma as a consequence. Wow. She got to Australia a couple of years back. Now it's what is it now? 4 or 5 years, about 5 years it is, because of the financial situation in Greece. She came back to Australia. Went and did a uni degree because, you know, the biggest problem is both my sisters had to, because even though my older sister, she was a teacher, my younger sister, a manager of a supermarket company, Atlantic. You may remember the Atlantic supermarket chain. They went bust. They expanded at the wrong time, you know, expanded with more stores, and then the crisis hit, and pretty much cash flow situation, wiped them out basically. Wrong timing. But you know, Susie lost her job. She had to come back here. But to cut a long story, she basically started eating, because at that stage I was doing low carb and all that, and more meat based low carb, because I'd started getting rid of more and more of the vegetables. And she basically started eating like me. She said, "Do you eat like this all the time?" And, you know, I said, "Well, you're here. I'm not going to cook any vegetarian crap for you," I said to her. And so she started, you know, trying a few things, you know, eggs and things like that were easier to consume, and the dairy parts and all that. And then eventually she did try meat. And within about 10 months, even though she's a light smoker, because she smoked in that period, she basically reversed her asthma completely.
That's wonderful.
And she goes, "What the hell just happened?" I said, "Well," I said, what do you think?" I said, "There's two possibilities. You either have some sort of genetic, you know, or there can be a number of things that can cause asthma. There's only not one thing. There can be a gut microbiome issue. There can be some genetics, which can be silenced with a cleaner diet, obviously, but also there can be some structural issues with lung surfactant being damaged, or with the wrong sort of foods, you know, fatty acids, carbon 16 fatty acids being incorporated in the lung surfactant and displacing palmitate. I mean, I say to people, look at the studies, go and check what lung surfactant is made of. It's basically choline and palmitate. They are the two constituent parts. It's not surprising the body stores most fats, if it can, as palmitate. It's not accidental, even though it's demonized. You know, you can cleave off four ketones off it as well. It's one of the best for storage and for utilization for structural material and stuff like that throughout the body. So it's a pervasively used. And I said, "Susie, you need more saturated fat in your diet. You're missing. You've been eating low fat crap on your vegetarian diet, and you're missing out key things." Because she started getting better, and because I didn't realize, and she started getting better, and I go, "Well, why don't you increase?" I started pushing more animal foods onto her, and within a couple of months after that, she gave up a puffer. She said, and now she basically consumes a heavy meat diet, you know, a lot of pork, and a lot of, like, she'll actually go and buy a whole large pork belly and actually cook that up, and, you know, so she's completely changed. She's stronger. She feels like, you know, because she's a year younger than me, but she had, you know, she was struggling. "I don't have enough energy. I'm really struggling," and stuff like that. And I sort of, you know, nowadays I can walk up the mountains. I couldn't actually go up one flight of stairs. I was 10 years ago, one flight of stairs, and I'd be panting like mad, you know, and struggling. And now 3 or 4 times a day at work, I literally walk up to the 9th floor, back down, up and down, you know, a couple of times. And that's part of my, you know, so it's high intensity, And I prefer doing that. So I sort of jog up and jog and then walk down, to be honest, just so, occupational health and safety, you don't want to slip or anything like that at work. And what were you doing? So to make an issue of it, it's safer actually jogging up than jogging down. So it's just keeping it safe. If it's elsewhere, I'd it's a different thing. But if you're at work, you sort of have to comply with rules in a corporate environment. So it's a bit different. But it's the things that I couldn't do before. I'm older now, 10 years older, and I've got more energy. Yeah. I'm healthier, fitter, and substantially lighter as well, 20 kilos lighter for that. Awesome. But I still got a bit to lose, and I still have to motivate myself next year to sort of lose the remainder. I've got about 8 kilos more until I get to my lean 20-year-old sort of thing. Great. I do want to get back to there. I do want to basically lose the remaining 8 kilos and be as lean where you could actually you could see my six-pack when I was actually a young teenager. So I think I can do it next year. So that's my goal for next year. This year it was one of those strange working from home. I ended up putting a bit of weight on. I put 4 kilos, nearly 5, 4.5, and then I've lost all that, which is good. But I didn't. Within 3 months, I'm going. Yeah, I need to stay away from the fridge. I need to stay away from home. I've gone back to work, and I am not working from home currently, and it made it much easier for me to lose the weight. And now I know that I do have my indiscretions, and unfortunately, that's ice cream. It's not the best thing. It does engage the Randall cycle. Ice cream, though. Yeah, I know. I'm a bit lazy. I should actually make my own ice cream, but I don't. But yeah, it was one of those things. Being back and also because you're also at home, you're going to be less active. You're going to be consuming too many calories, and even if you go excess, even on good food, you will store some fat. That's the reality.
No, it's true, because I was a bit more pudgy in my Icarian videos because I wanted to, when the food was offered, I wanted to have it. And I usually eat a small eating window. So it wasn't a lot, but it was like 4 pounds, which is a lot on my frame. So yeah, I find if you eat more often or more food, even if it's really healthy, you can put the weight on pretty easily. Luckily, it came off quickly as well.
Exactly. The difference is it is subcutaneous. It's not visceral, which is the key thing, and that's why it comes off easier as well.
Yes,
that's the reason why it comes.
And it's perfectly healthy weight too.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you take a look at some of the tribal populations, they actually consider it a healthy thing to have a bit of fat on.
They do. Yeah.
We have this obsession.
No, it's very true. It's very true because the fat is your storage also of toxins. So if you do come across a toxin, let's say you eat the wrong plant or something in the wild, it's going to go to your fat cells, usually to be stored, which protects the organs. So you do need some fat cells on you. You don't want to look like a Kate Moss or an emaciated person, ideally, even if that's the beauty standard. You want a little bit, but just not much, and never around the organs, like you were saying.
That's precisely, and at the end of the day, the only time you're going to get it around the organs is primarily if you're basically if it's fructose, if it's alcohol, it's those things that drive visceral fat. I mean, that's right. Most people don't realize you can actually. There are some children that actually have I can't remember the actual. It's one of the GLUT receptors where they have an inability to export glycogen out of the liver, and they can grow massive livers. And it's sort of something to do with the GLUT2, but I can't remember the exact genetics of it. Do you remember the genetics?
I don't. I haven't seen it in my practice, but I know of the condition.
Yeah, it's one of the genetic SNPs, but it just doesn't. It's not coming to my head at the moment. But it basically causes this massive, and these kids are completely healthy. They got no problems because glycogen, even though it can build up subcutaneous fat as a consequence, it's not going to kill you. Because humans basically came across and built up these stores for a rainy day. So it's not an issue. It's primarily
The fructose.
It's the fructose, and then it's also the industrial seed oils that are really nasty.
Yeah.
They are really nasty because they cause signaling problems. I don't know how, we don't really understand enough, because a lot of the studies, because the rat studies that we do a lot of these experiments on, they're highly confounded because the chow of the actual rat is also very high in fructose. So is it the fructose only? Is it, I think it's both the seed oil and the fructose, but I think they work very differently. Fructose is driving visceral fat. I think what is happening with the actual seed oils is they're so damaged, when they get incorporated into tissue, they cause signaling issues.
That's right.
And I believe that they also cause hormonal problems because of those signaling issues. There's also I think the structures, also the actual glycan structures on the actual the cells, I think they are in some way affected by this incorporation of this damaged fats in those, and it affects the way they can signal. We don't. It's a new area now. I mean, you've probably heard a bit about it, glycans and stuff like that. It's a very new area. I don't. We don't understand the signaling because we've got zero mechanistic studies, unfortunately. I've searched PubMed now for, last month I actually did an extensive search and I couldn't find anything that actually could show me mechanism.
Yeah.
All they could,
I would go international. I find the best studies to be international. Like Russia, I think, has some of the best studies on this, because they nutrition is a part of their medical degree, like a very big part. And so is microbiome studies, or our microbiome studies. And so because of that, they have, I think, the best studies done on all sorts of things, from omega-6 fatty acids to the microbiome to acetylcholine to fructose metabolism and all these kinds of things. I find they're far more advanced, and they do more human than rat in mouse.
That's true.
Because the problem with, there's something interesting. I don't know if you saw this. I think it came out about a year ago. But they did 2 mouse studies on the same subject, and one was from wild mice, so their microbiome was intact, right, how it would normally be, and the other was on the normal lab mouse, which is always kind of typically hammered with antibiotics.
That's true.
To have a clean slate so that they can study it well. Completely different outcomes. Completely, which says that maybe we're going to in the future be throwing out all the mouse studies that we've done, if that's the case.
I would not be surprised.
I wouldn't either.
I mean, I actually showed some of the on one of my videos. I actually showed a rat study where they were actually feeding bacon to the rat, and they were inducing colon cancer with some sort of substance that they were giving. And I showed the guys and I said, look, they're eating all this, the standard chow, and no effect. Some of the other meats, no effect. There was like beef and a whole lot of other things there, chicken. And I said, bacon, look at bacon. Look at the effect of bacon. It's a processed meat, a processed pork meat, which everybody demonizes, but it's actually protective.
Yeah.
And they were just shocked, because basically it's not something that most people...
we've all been told.
Exactly. It's not something, and I'm going, I wonder why these sort of, like when you go to all these towns and all that, most of these people are consuming bacon in a cured form or with quite salted. I wonder why you very rarely in villages and stuff like that hear about colon cancer or stuff like that. Non-existent.
Cancer, period, in the villages. Yeah.
Non-existent. It works for the rat. Does it work for the human in the same way? I'm speculating because we don't have any studies, and we're probably never going to do those sort of studies. They're not that fashionable. But the reality is that it's a paradox,
It
And
is. And I think, you know, if we look at the American diet in the 17 and 1800s, it's very lard heavy and pork heavy. Lard was the main cooking fat that people used. And
precisely.
aside from butter, depending on the region, and they ate a lot of cured pork, a great deal of it, and yet cancer rates were very low. And this is even with the settlers who were eating, you know, some grain and things like this, and things that could spike the blood sugar and potentially feed cancer cells. But cancer rates were very, very low. And then we cut out the lard around like 1910, 1920. We brought in Crisco instead, and the vegetable oils in 1920 exactly. And cancer rates really went up very quickly. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And especially with what we're learning about how antioxidants play a protective role with cancer and these kind of things. If bacon, ironically, isn't going to be heralded in the future as a good anti-cancer food.
I'm promoting it.
No, and I think it would be interesting too to see so many of the cultures that that love pork and eat a lot of pork, like the Spanish. They have a set diet for those pigs. So the Spanish, it's the acorns or hazelnut, right? And here it's in Greece, it's usually wild. The pork is often wild. So it's eating all the greens and the animals and things like that. And I'm not sure about Okinawa, what the diet would be like, but I'd have to check. But it would be interesting to see the difference between like a corn-fed pig versus an acorn-fed or versus a wild-fed pig, and what that fatty acid profile ends up
Look,
being.
the fatty acid profile would definitely be skewed to some extent. That would be quite clear. But I don't think it's a big problem, because I think the way fats are incorporated in animal flesh is less of a problem. I think that's the ultimate thing, because you look at cultures, they throw anything at pigs and they'll eat it.
Yes, they'll eat anything. Yeah.
And the reality is, a pig, I mean, you look at populations like in the Pacific Islanders, they have small piglets, a large amount of piglets, which is their main source of land animal, because the land there is basically very salty, very you know, I mean, these are basically you know, sort of islands that have grown out of reefs and stuff like that, so they don't have a lot of really good soils, pretty much. So it's sort of coconut, fish, and pork, and some tubers. That's really what their diet is, to a large extent, their traditional diet anyway. But the thing that that is common, as I said earlier, is pork. But and it varies what they get access to, and also seasonally what they can eat, which is the other thing. Greece is a bit particular because of the way its topography. It's just you know, it's just rocky, as I said earlier. It's a very different environment, which does provide that a better fatty acid profile. That's true. I suspect something may be similar in Okinawa. You know, it is an island after all. And I think island areas will tend to have probably a better, a better profile, and more pork as well, for that reason. But I think also there's probably another element there that I always say to people: how many grams, like for 100 grams in any, whether you look at tallow, whether you look at beef, it's the PUFA component is only about half a gram per 100. You know, so it's not as if it's massive. So even if the fatty acid profile isn't that fantastic, as long as the population is eating some fish to get the other essential, the EPA and the DHA, as long as they're getting, because when you're eating a lot of PUFA from an animal, you will actually convert most of that to arachidonic acid.
Which is correct.
Which is great for us. But it means that basically, you know, you won't be able to convert ALA, obviously, even if you consume whatever amount of plants. So the only other way is actually to get it in the diet. And I think that because these populations tend to have some coastal fish within their diet, that sort of balances possibly out within the diet, and it's not a big issue. As long as you're getting some DHA and EPA in the diet, you don't really need the to convert because you're eating a more animal-based diet, so there is no necessity for conversion in a sense.
I would say I agree with you based on experience. So I'm very much a boots on the ground. I work with so many people each day, and I work with all sorts of different conditions and lots of different diets. So I really see like what works and what doesn't in certain situations. And a lot of the people I work with simply don't have the money to get the kind of meats that people suggest, And to this day, so far, I haven't ever seen it impede someone's ability to heal or recover. So even if they're eating like corn-fed beef or corn-fed chicken, these kind of things, I still see the remissions take place. There's one exception I would say, and that was a unique one, and I don't think it had anything to do with the meat quality, but I had a patient with histamine intolerance, a really severe case, and she was getting all her food from the Whole Food, I probably shouldn't say the name, from the Whole Food pre-made foods area. And I didn't know that. So I was looking at her food journal and it was saying like chicken or salmon and broccoli and these kind of things, and looked very clean. And I wasn't seeing the results I would expect for someone eating the kind of macros she was until I learned where she was getting it from. And they cook in canola and soy oil and those kind of things. And so I ran a test on her. I tend to not be test heavy. You can usually see things pretty well and patterns in people, but I had her run an omega-3, omega-6 test, and her omega-6 was just off the charts. It was as if she was just drinking canola oil. And when we changed that, we saw a huge difference in her health. So I can see it if someone is using the cooking fats, but I haven't yet seen it in the tens of thousands of people I've worked with the animal fats. I still, if you can afford it, I still recommend eating it the ancestral way. So for instance, like chicken and pork, they can eat most things. So they're the most lax on diet, I would say, whereas a beef is really much more specific. Lamb is very specific. So where you can afford it, I think it's always a good idea. But yeah, I haven't seen it be the problem that it's being made out to be.
Yeah, exactly. I think that a diversity, my sort of feeling is that if you look at most populations around the world, that's why I don't get too wound up about the actual fatty acid profile so much, but I actually look at that there is differences, like pork, very high niacin, very high in thiamine. There are different profiles, and I think that if you don't mix up slightly the sort of the animal foods that you get taking in, you're not going to get that sort of mix of rich sort of vitamins and minerals, because there is a different mineral profile even with animal foods. And if you're not varying, if you're just eating a steak only, well, you're going to get less copper over the long haul. But if you're basically throwing in some seafoods, some crustaceans, some organ meats and stuff like that, you're going to end up with a better profile. Now, there are metalloprotein that are at the gut lining that can actually, that do regulate part of the mineral take-up. So even if you do consume, let's say an example where you're getting very little copper and you're consuming massive amounts of whether it's iron or zinc or whatever, at the same time, there's only so much that can go in, and the body can regulate that to some extent. So it's not going to be as big an issue as some people try to, and I always say, well, you have to temper it down. But my concern isn't that amount, but sometimes because of the type of meats, there are specific cuts in beef that are really poor in copper. Others that are not too bad. So if you're eating those, it's less of a problem. But if you're eating just that type that is very much lower, and you continue eating that year after year, there is always that small, niggling potential where you may, it's just because it's not a question of the body regulating. It's just, well, it's not enough coming in. It's not enough coming in. It's just simple as that. And that's where the issue can build up. But it's going to be a very gradual thing than an immediate thing. And that's another reason why some people may not pick up on it as well.
It's very True. And I think another reason to eat seasonally, because we often think of seasons as in terms of vegetables and fruits, but actually meats are very seasonal and proteins are very seasonal as well. So that is actually really important to do. So for instance, in even, 100 years ago in America, you were only eating chicken in the summer. That's the time you eat chicken, right? And different animals have different seasons. Beef is usually the winter, lamb is the spring, and these kind of things. So, and some of them were diurnal as well, so they'd have more than one season. But if you do eat something on a long-term basis, you actually get full of those amino acids. And I can see it in patients. Sometimes my patients, they can only tolerate one protein when we start working. So let's say maybe it's chicken or it's beef, but it's really the only one they do well with. After some time, they usually get to a point where they're actually kind of repelled from that meat. And my theory is that they're just full on those amino acids. It's time to rotate, right?
Exactly.
And yeah. And those amino acids are such a big key. It's looking like with autoimmunity and those kind of things. So yeah, rotating your meats and proteins, at least seasonally. You can eat the same thing for a season, but then you want to switch it up a bit.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I think that's the way, because that's the natural way that we did, not only traditional societies, but going all the way back, we ate seasonally, all the different foods that we ate. And it's really important that we make those adjustments to the way, whether you're doing a keto, carnivore, or whatever diet you're doing, you need to basically access a number of different micronutrients, because at the end of the day, that's what we need as cofactors for a whole lot of hydrolyzing sort of functions that are happening in our body. But without those cofactors, certain things are not going to work very well. And this is where people get certain symptoms and they go, oh, I got these symptoms. And the first thing I always ask them, I need details about what you're eating. Really tell me truthfully what you're eating, because unless I've got details, it's really hard, because then you're just guessing, and it's sort of, if you really want, and I usually tell them, give me a history of what you ate before, so I know whether they're coming in deficiently. So if somebody tells me I've just come off a SAD diet or a vegan diet or whatever, they go, okay, they're going to be deficient in fat soluble vitamins, in B vitamins, and in a number of minerals. So we need to address that, for a couple of months, and then we need to basically then just get it from the foods and stuff like that. Issues like too much, particular people that are on a SAD diet, not so much with the vegans or vegetarians, but people from a SAD diet, the biggest thing that I usually find is overuse of antibiotics.
Always.
Heavy use of antibiotics. It's like they go with a complaint to their doctor. The first thing that's handed over is an antibiotic, more or less. And then there's also the glyphosate part as well, because I don't know whether your listeners are aware, glyphosate is a patented antibiotic.
That's right.
So the glyphosate, when you're looking at it from a chemical point of view, they're actually far worse. They're actually in the plants. There are some chemistry in the plants that is actually far more toxic to the body than glyphosate. So glyphosate isn't bad in terms of toxicity so much. The biggest problem is that it just wreaks havoc to your gut microbiome and allows pathogenic bacteria then to take hold. And when you've got too much pathogenic bacteria, then nasty things can happen in your digestive tract and to the rest of your body. That's what it's an indirect culprit sort of thing, but it's really the antibiotic component. And this is where there's an issue with meats, like in Europe and a number of other parts of the world where glyphosate is sort of restricted or not as pervasive. It's less of an issue. Greece in particular, because most of the animals, people are not going to import grain. They're just going to get them, put them on the land, and they're just going to eat grass.
Exactly.
So you're not going to have that problem in Greece. But in other parts of the world where they've got them in compounds and they're feeding them in an industrial setting, and they're feeding them a lot of these glyphosate-rich plants or grains, to be more particular, I think that's where the problem comes from pork. And I find in North America in particular, most people in North America tell me, oh, it's, I don't feel great, when I have pork and all that. And I go, well, okay. Go. If you can't find grass or pastured, just go for pastured, whatever meat you can get pastured. And certain other things, like I'll put them on things like sardines and things like that, to try and get some protein in the animal protein, to avoid some of these. They probably need the sardines anyway, because they've got so much omega-6 in them anyway. So we need to sort that out anyway. But you end up getting resolution. People feel much better. So, and they realize, oh, it's not the pork. Oh, I wonder what it is. It's the glyphosate that they're feeding on.
And that's usually in the fatty tissue as well.
Exactly.
So what someone can do if they're in a pickle, like they don't have a lot of food choice, they can get the really lean cuts, like the pork tenderloin, and then cook it in their own tallow or their own lard that's a high quality, and they should be able to avoid that issue as well.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. They can do that. And also, or butter or whatever else they can combine is a much easier option that people have got in that regard. So yeah, I think we've covered this sort of these myths and stuff like that quite a bit. I do look forward to you sending me some of those studies. I'd like to look at them. They are in Greek. I can translate them. So, and I'm not promising I'm doing anything. I'll do it next year, the translation, then I'll send them back to you, translated, so you've got information. But
Awesome.
Yeah, it's really important that we get the message out to people and they actually see really how it was put together and stuff like that. Because to a large extent, people think that these studies were done where they covered things properly and in detail. That wasn't the case. First of all, they ignored the local culture. Second, they did not even ask about the foods that they ate, really, actually really document things properly or stuff like that. And thirdly, they basically their observation time was very limited.
That's
so
right.
It's confounded in so many aspects.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because people really believe that these are double-blind studies, which is not something that can be done when you look at a whole population diet.
Exactly.
It's never actually a study. A study is when you look at one thing. It's a survey. And yet, sometimes when I'm on these podcasts, someone will write in and be like, you're refuting double-blind science. Like, you have not looked at the studies.
Exactly.
Those are not double-blind.
It's a survey.
It's a survey. It's not even the scientific community would not call it a study. It's what you base a study off of. That's it. And that's where you get your hypothesis and you go from there.
Exactly.
But the public really seems to have this belief that this is, God's truth.
Yeah, but the problem is it's 95% of research are surveys, observational surveys, highly confounded in so many multiple ways, and they're only there to basically, as I've actually understood, because when I look back at the scientific world, I mean, people like Einstein or people like Niels Bohr or whoever, in the past, in their whole life, whole career, they probably would have done maybe 3 to 4, maybe 5 studies at most. What were they doing for the rest of the time? Well, they were in research labs and they were doing really hardcore research, trying to work out exactly how things work, because they were interested in working out how things work. They weren't interested in basically, and then telling the world once they had something to tell. Where most modern researchers, because of the way, and it's, I don't blame a lot of modern day researchers as much as the institutions that they work for. Their institutions have a tendency, they are after the dollar. Let's be honest.
Yeah, they're quite limited
in
what they can study.
They want academic rankings, which means that you have to push out a lot of studies in order for the institution to get higher academic ranking. So as a consequence of that, they have to basically push out the cheapest sort of variety, and they're going to be basically reviews and stuff like that, which basically is going to just be poor research. And unfortunately, that's what is the majority of the stuff out there.
Yeah.
And that's
a
what
note on that
the media
too,
pick up on.
for the audience, when you see a study is peer-reviewed, what peer-reviewed means, scientists are not paid to peer review a study. So they do it as a favor system, typically. So for instance, if you had done a study and I'm working on a study that's going to come out, I would peer review yours so that you would then hopefully peer review mine. And because of that, it's very rare for someone to sit down and really do a deep review of a study, because it's kind of just like something they have to get done so that they can get favors as well, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot behind the scenes that, yeah, that really compromises the knowledge that gets put out to the public.
Yeah, I mean, it's once you don't have an independent reviewer, and because there's the sort of, I'll make sure I'll tick and flick yours, you'll do the same for me, and it's part of that sort of culture that we've emerged in, where in the past, when you put something out, the first thing that would happen is you would have like 100, like even Einstein had 100 academics basically attacking in one hit, and started going through and trying to tear shreds through his research, even though eventually with experimental science we were able to prove, and we're proving more and more every day, that a lot of what he realized was correct. But scientists just didn't accept it blindly. I find nowadays there's this sort of blind acceptance, when something hasn't been put through the ringer, so to speak. And, scientists in the past, what people need to understand is they basically were the biggest critiques of their own work.
Yes.
That means they tried to falsify their work because they wanted to get to the heart of what is true and what isn't.
That's right.
We're unfortunately...
So totally different archetype now going into the scientific field, right? So there's a lot of scientists in my family, mostly physicists. And in the 80s and 90s, they had really full reign. Like they had lots of choices on what they studied. Granted, that's a totally different field than food and nutrition, right? But they had so much fun in their careers. And as it became the 2000s, things really changed due to the funding of studies and these kind of things. And suddenly they were very restricted. They started to hate their jobs, which had never happened before, those kind of things. So yeah, it's really become an inhospitable environment for real scientists and the scientist archetype to be in the sciences right now, because you have to do things for funding. You don't have a lot of freedom, which really scientists are usually creative, right? That's why Einstein was so great. Yeah. And it's not allowing for that or fostering that creativity in those individuals.
It's like things that I've sort of said when it comes to sort of climate research and stuff like that. It's not as if I accept that there is change in the climate. It always has happened, always will be there. But there are other things that we're ignoring, like the actual polar, the magnetosphere, and that isn't being taken into account. Other things like measurements, different locations around the world, and they're highly confounded because they've been moved to different locations, different elevations, change temperature, all these sort of things. I'm not saying that, there is good evidence that basically, that these are greenhouse gases, but is it the small amount that we're putting out there? Because we've seen higher amounts in the past in historical terms, but not that. I'm not disputing that it's a greenhouse gas, but what I'm saying is it the key driver? That's where I'm just being critical. Yeah, I could be completely wrong, but the thing is, at the end of the day, a true scientist basically looks at it and says, well, we look through historical and we can see variations. So yes, it can be a factor. And we know that in all even the Milankovitch cycles, each time temperature comes before carbon dioxide. And that's because basically when you heat up oceans, they actually lose more carbon dioxide. It's so, is it something that we've done in particular? Putting it in carbon dioxide doesn't actually heat up the system on its own. This is the sort of the fallacy that what happens is you need a driver, and what is that driver? I suspect there are things like, because how much we've contributed, because I've actually gone back and looked at a bit of the, the old scientists who actually looked at sort of the amounts that were actually being, that were coming from our own activities. Mm. And when you look at it, it doesn't compute very well with where you see there is far more coming out of the oceans, and you're going, well, is that being driven by other natural processes with this magneto reversal? Yeah. And because of the magneto reversal and more solar radiation coming through because of a weaker magnetosphere, could that be the driver? Even though we're not, we don't have a lot of sunspots, but at the same time, we've been having this weaker and weaker over time of the magnetosphere. So, I mean, a couple of years, about 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk in the scientific community, probably amongst your relatives as well, talking about, the potential of a magneto reversal happening in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. So I mean, so it's been weakening. I'm not saying that is the primary cause. It could be. I don't know.
Yeah, but we don't actually know. That's very true.
Our science is very limited. We're not at Star Trek type levels where we can actually measure every single molecule.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We don't have that capacity. We are very limited. We are very primitive still in these areas. It's not that we shouldn't research these areas, but we shouldn't, let's say, jump to conclusions and literally upend our whole society. I still think we should mitigate to some extent. That's a prudent way when you've got a risk. I mean, you're not going to have it. There's a likelihood you could have an accident. You may never have an accident, but you do take out insurance. Exactly. So there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not sort of, like an obstinate or, taking a very hard line in that regard. But at the same time, we shouldn't completely upend our society as well when there are a whole lot of other pressing things. I mean, I'm more concerned about the amount of pollution in the oceans, the amount of pollution on the land because of, crop or monoculture crops and their destruction of, a lot of our waterways. I mean, in Australia, I mean, the Murray-Darling, that's largely affected because of monocrops. It's the dirty little secret in Australia, one of our biggest waterways, that it's largely not from animal agriculture or even from kangaroos. It's primarily because of a lot of the actual, these grain producers are along this river system.
Yeah.
And they're just taking out a whole lot of water and throwing a whole lot of chemicals in there.
We have that in the States as well. So Ohio, where I'm from, we had a river catch on fire. Actually, and it was in the middle of all of these grain fields, this river that ran.
Exactly.
Ohio is kind of the breadbasket, right? So lots of grain is grown there. But yeah, the monocrops are really quite horrific for the environment.
They are absolutely horrific. I mean, this is what the vegans don't understand. I mean, in actual this river system, there's a part of the river system that it's like one of the branches of the river system that doesn't get as much water. Yeah. And that whole part is so damaged, it's like battery acid.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons. Yeah, that's why I think it's so important to look at how people lived before while they were healthy, right? Because that's something we didn't talk about, but I'm sure your listeners know that in remote parts of the world, people just don't have health issues when they're not living the way we do and eating the way we do. They really have quite perfect health. They don't get the malaria, the cavities, these kind of things. And you see that with the environment as well. This monocrop system is very new. And what are we getting from it? A real big problem. So what the vegetarians and the vegans, I think they're very well meaning. They see a problem and they're like, okay, I'm going to do something about it. And that makes them feel better, right? And they think they're doing the right thing. But it's too surface of a level of knowledge because
Precisely.
it's just too surface. That's it. And surface knowledge gets us the kind of problems that you're dealing with.
It does very much. I mean, as a person, of Greek Orthodox faith, at the same time, I don't want to see anybody suffer or, them. Of course.
Yeah, of
I would
course.
rather see them, come back to the fold of the animal, the human family, and sort of repair all of their health issues. And there are better ways we can actually deal with this sort of things. We can basically, regenerative agriculture is a better way of doing things. There's a
Much.
lot of things we can do to change our food production. And you've seen it in Greece. You've seen an environment where it's very limited.
Yes.
We grow rocks, but still we're able to produce some of the best meats in the world.
Yeah.
So it's not impossible. We don't need to decimate the environment to grow high quality foods.
At all. Yeah.
Mary, it's been great chatting with you. I really
Ditto.
enjoyed.
It's so great to get to spend this time with you. I can't even tell you. It's been wonderful. You'll have to come to Greece, and hopefully I'll be here when you do, and we can go out and celebrate.
Definitely, definitely.
Yes.
Thank you for coming along and having a chat with me about Greece and the blue zones and stuff like that. I think you've got a wealth of, I want your back. I want to really go into some of the other populations and all that and discuss those. Maybe if I can twist your arm, get you to one of my Eurasian live streams, so some of my subs can ask you a whole lot of questions.
Happy to.
Great. I'll hold her to it, guys.
Sounds good.
I appreciate it. Thanks for being here, and we'll call it a night, and take care, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this sort of coverage of the true Mediterranean diet of Greece, and some of the nonsense that we've been sort of, or the wall that was pulled over our heads for a very long time. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you, and see you all.